As you walk along in your average day, there is much you take for granted. The clothes on your back, your everyday journey from A to B, even your identity. Now stop for a second and imagine what it would be like if you woke up one day and all that was gone. Your name, your identity, everything that forms the fabric of your life. You've just entered a day in the life of Second Sight's lead character, John Vaddick. Over the next 20 minutes, you will have exclusive behind-the-scenes access to the production team that have worked tirelessly over the last 2.5 years to give you Second Sight. Second Sight was created by a team with a well-established background in action-adventure gameplay, Free Radical Design. Based in Nottingham, England, Free Radical's pedigree is second to none. The creative team's past successes prior to forming Free Radical include Perfect Dark, GoldenEye, and subsequently the Time Splitters series. But rather than dining out on past glories, Free Radical have boldly set out to redefine stealth action gaming with a story-driven Second Sight. They've added a new dimension to the genre, which is sure to establish Second Sight as a classic of its time. Free Radical director David Doe tells us how the production team came together and where the idea for the game came from.
So Free Radical was formed in 1999. The 5 founder members had all previously worked at Rare, and 4 of us had worked on GoldenEye, and all of us had worked on Perfect Dark. So kind of were looking for a new challenge, very much wanted to do our own kind of IP and our own games, and so the idea to leave and set up Free Radical. When we formed Free Radical, we were very keen to do a story-based game. The games we worked on previously had both been very kind of narrative-driven. I mean, one was a movie license, the other was original. And Second Sight started really as an idea of trying to tell a story in an interesting way in a game. First of all, there was the kind of idea of having flashbacks. And that was really, the flashback idea started because we wanted to have some kind of interactivity in the narrative, so that it wasn't entirely passive throughout. And that seemed a good way of kind of having you see things before and after, and maybe to change things. It's often said about games that, you know, wouldn't it be great to have a game where you actually change the story? The reality of it is, if you have a game where the story changes in a kind of like fairly ad hoc manner, the possibilities suddenly spiral out of control, and it's difficult to justify creating the assets for the game to cover all of the eventualities. So flashback allowed us to have change in the narrative, but to keep the whole thing under control.
But with Free Radical's success with straight shoot-'em-ups like Time Splitters 1 and 2, how did they hope to achieve success with a story-driven game?
Well, the initial kind of idea behind it was this thing about having a man with psychic powers, but in the kind of the normal real world. There was certain sections of the game where we decided that in terms of the past timeline, the first couple of levels, you wouldn't have access to the psychic powers. It would be a bit of a surprise as you got through to it. And we wanted to tell this story of this character and his kind of journey through that. And just basically kind of exploring the idea of having this man with these psychic powers in quite a realistic setting.
In Second Sight, the whole thing was built around this narrative structure and story from the start. So going into that project, that was a major goal, was let's make sure we do the story really, really well.
Why can't I remember anything?
Also by that stage, because the company had matured and grown in experience and things, Time Splitters 2 was the first time we'd done really proper kind of cinematic bookending cutscenes to the levels. Second Sight, that was a prerequisite for doing it, was that every level would have to have an in and out cutscene, defining it and pushing the story along.
I gotta get this door open. I guess that switch out there opens the door. If I could just press it somehow. I don't understand what's going on at all. And what happened to those straps holding me to the bed?
So with the main idea for the game developing organically, the team had to get to work creating the character of John Vadek and the other people he would interact with, not to mention the world in which they would exist.
The idea for the characters in Second Sight was to make them a lot more realistic than the ones in previous games we worked on. We wanted to steer away from the cartoony style, and the serious nature of the story works better with a more realistic style of character. So that's what we were trying to aim for, while still keeping the stylisation that our company is recognised for.
Excuse me, I'm Vadek, Dr. John Vadek.
The biggest challenge for the backgrounds was basically you've got two very distinct time periods. You've got the A time frame, you've got the B time frame, and the idea really was to try and kind of create a separation between the two. I'd say probably the major way we did that was through things like colour, like the B timeline.
What am I doing here?
You're here to change things for the better, John.
It's supposed to have happened before the A timeline, so it's much, the colours are much more like muted. It's supposed to be like the past, so we tried to push that to the fore, whereas the colours in the A timeline are much more saturated and much more rich.
I don't get this. Jane Wilde killed in action? What the?
No one else can say
What?
that.
John Vadek.
When I started writing music for a level, I'd look at the level and see what tasks there were to perform, how heavy the AI would be, and how much gunfighting there would be. And that would give you clues as in how the music would start.
There were difficulties in swapping from a more stylised approach to a more realistic approach, because obviously, because you're trying to copy the real world, you've got to be a lot more spot on. You can't afford to have little flourishes and things that you wouldn't see in the real world.
When I started writing music, I watched a lot of films that were pertinent to the game we were making, but the one that really stuck in my mind was The Shining. Although the film itself isn't very similar to the game we were making, the music really did it for me. It gave such a tense experience just watching that film, which was basically a few people in a house, and that really inspired me a lot.
When you're modelling a level for Second Sight, the first stage you do is basically the modelling. This is a wireframe model of the first room of the animal lab. You'll probably see more realism in the colour schemes in, for instance, the B timeline, whereas the A timeline it's quite a lot richer. We use a lot more film techniques like colour filtering and things like that to try and give it a more sort of cinematic appearance.
So what's all this about? Look, I'm glad to be of help, but one day's notice is barely enough time for me to get
We're out
on.
of time, Dr. Vadek. Can you handle a sidearm?
They said my role was strictly advisory.
Then advise yourself to get some weapons training. My squad doesn't nursemaid tourists.
I'm in a squad now?
We'll explain it all at the briefing. 1800 hours. Be there.
And it is the cinematic cut scenes in Second Sight that drip feed the player with the small clues that propel them back and forth through time. Lead animator James Cunliffe takes us through the process of these short pieces of drama.
Psychic phenomena at a POW camp on the Belo-Russian border.
The effort that we put into keeping the cutscenes short and the information concise was quite remarkable, really. Making sure that the viewer had enough information but not too much, and in as concise a time frame as possible.
John Vadek.
Dr. Vadek.
What happened? I need to remember.
The most difficult thing about animating Second Sight was the fact that the characters are pseudo-realistic, and the pressures put on the animators to create realistic motion were were very high, certainly compared to games that we have worked on in the past.
John, Dad,